Hey, Katie. We have The Clue of the Broken Locket. We are on Chapter 18, The Chase. You mean, Nancy said excitedly, a delivery of illegal records? I'm sure of it, said Dave. We got close enough to hear Carl Driscoll say there's going to be a second delivery later, to Baltimore. After that, he said, the Driscolls, the children, and Susan would make their getaway. Susan, Nancy echoed. The girl detective was once more puzzled. What had Carl meant by getaway? Was the red-haired girl not a prisoner, but mixed up in the Driscolls' racket? Had Susan dropped the half-locket? And what about the twins? Was Nancy's secret theory true? Now she quickly outlined a plan to the others. This time, Cecily insisted on taking part. I think you boys should follow the truck, Nancy said. We girls will watch the house. That's a good idea, Dave agreed. We may all have to do some chasing sooner or later, Nancy went on. We'd better take both cars and hide them along the lane that leads to the main road. They locked the cottage and hurried up to the two cars. Ned and Bert were waiting for them behind the trees at the intersection of the road leading to Puddingstone Lodge. A minute later, a truck pulled away from the stone house and roared down the street. Nancy and the others strained their eyes to see who was in it. As it lumbered past, they saw that the driver was Vince. Nancy identified the man beside him as Webby. Let's go, fellows, Ned urged, and told Nancy that on the way the boys would telephone Detective Morton in Baltimore. As soon as the youth's car was out of sight, Nancy drove the girls nearer the lodge, hid the car once more, and the four proceeded on foot. Nancy signaled a halt beneath a lighted open window on the second floor. Listen! The girls could hear the twins crying. The little girl was begging plaintively for a story. Mrs. Driscoll's annoyed voice floated down clearly. Don't bother me. Go to sleep. The little girl asked, Why are we dressed? We never go to bed with all our clothes on. The girls grew tense. This corroborated Dave's statement that the occupants were all leaving. But how soon? Nancy wondered. She must find Susan. Bess and George, whispered Nancy. You keep spying on the lodge. If Mrs. Driscoll drives away with the children, follow her. If Susan is with them, George, give the owl signal whistle we use sometimes. Meanwhile, Cecily and I will investigate the beach. Nancy did not dare use her flashlight. She and Cecily picked their way carefully down the wooded bluff to the bottom. She felt it was almost hopeless to hunt for a hidden door in the heavy growth of vines on the darkened hillside, but she was determined to try. Both girls carried on a long, tedious search. Suddenly, Nancy touched a cold metal, then felt the outline of a door. Elated, she was just about to try pulling it open, when suddenly a voice nearby hissed, Now I've got you right where I want you. Nancy and Cecily froze in fright. They expected to be grabbed, or to be revealed in a flashlight's glow. But nothing happened. No one appeared. The girls stared at the door, and now noticed dim light coming through a rounded opening at the top. They could not see in. The same voice went on. Your brother ain't here to back you up, Carl, so you're gonna account to me. Nancy and Cecily stood close together, holding hands. Their hearts were thumping. This voice was coming from just inside the secret door. Okay, Raskin, what's your beef? Carl asked. Neil Raskin! So he was mixed up in the Driscoll's racket. Why didn't you keep that snooping prying Nancy Drew from ruining our record game? In a whining voice, Carl tried to defend himself. I found this place, didn't I? When we discovered it was empty, I couldn't collect any reward for those kids. I rented it out for a record factory. Reward for the children? Nancy and Cecily stared at each other in bewilderment. Carl went on. Wasn't I the one that set up the sound movie of the Phantom launch to scare off the summer residents and that winch fellow? There was no answer, and Driscoll added, I was watching from the attic the night Nancy Drew and the other girls came to that cottage. And later, when I spotted her near here, I signaled to Vince over the intercom to stop the machinery in the beach house. That was a busy night for me. Susan Wayne had escaped. Vince and I caught her in the woods, tied her up, gagged her, and dragged her back to the lodge. On the way I heard footsteps and saw some girl climbing the slope. I pushed her from behind and she fell down. I guess she was knocked out because she didn't move. When I went back later to take a look, Nancy Drew was with her, so I rolled a big log down on the two of them. All right, said Raskin. So you captured Susan Wayne because she found out too much about you three in the racket, but you didn't stop that Drew dame. So, girl, or lady. You messed things up yourself, Carl retorted. You tried to kidnap her and Nico Van Dyke, and they get out of the car and walk away. Raskin snorted indignantly. How did I know she suspected they were being kidnapped? I worked hard on this business, Carl insisted. I even apologized when Vince ordered those girls away so they wouldn't get suspicious. And then you brought that iron bird to fool them. When you told me the Drew girl's friends came to your office, I tried to scare her away from Misty Lake. I locked her out on the roof and sent Vince flying over to wreck the cottage so they'd all go home. And just in case that didn't work, I had him put a hole in the canoe. But that didn't frighten off Miss Nancy Drew either, Raskin said angrily. Is it my fault you don't scare easy? Even when Vince and I sneaked out to the cottage and threw a rock inside, she and her pals didn't leave. Yeah, but what good did it do? Raskin sneered. That girl detective sure can't put it all over you. She tricked you by making you think that red-haired girl on the beach was Susan and that she'd escaped. Carl admitted this, saying he had panicked and had not stopped to think. But his wife had, and found Susan still locked in the attic room. So I moved her down here to the beach house and whistled for Vince to come back. I had a feeling Nancy Drew would get the police, but I fooled them plenty, so you can't say I haven't done anything. Raskin complained. We had a swell racket going. Now, thanks to those nosy girls, we gotta stop it. After we get the load of records out tonight, we'll be out of business. There was no conversation for a few minutes. Nancy and Cecily could hear boxes being shoved around. Finally, Carl said, This is the last box. We'll carry this up, load the truck, it'll be full, and take care of Susan later. The two girls heard footsteps receding. When she was sure they had left the room, Nancy tried the door. It would not budge. She called Susan's name, but there was no answer. Oh, we must get in there and save Susan, Cecily said, as she and Nancy kept pushing and pulling on the door. It had started to drizzle, and instantly Nancy thought of slippery roads. She wondered how the boys were making out. At that very moment, Ned, Bert, and Dave had pulled into an all-night gas station. While the attendant filled up the tank, Ned rushed to a phone booth and called police headquarters in Baltimore, asking that Detective Morton be alerted about the Driscoll truck headed for the city. Ned dashed outside, climbed behind the wheel, and resumed the pursuit. Vince's truck was not going very fast in the misty drizzle, so it was easy for the boys to catch up. Suddenly, the truck turned into a wide, bumpy side road, only one lane wide. Where do you suppose they're making this delivery? Dave asked. Bert replied, I can't imagine. It had begun to rain hard now, and the poorly paved road was very slippery. On the left side was a deep ditch. Ned kept as far from it as possible. Presently, he slowed down at a sharp curve where a large sign warned, Sound horn, go slow. Vince Driscoll didn't sound his horn, Dave pointed out. You can bet I'm not going to sound mine, Ned answered. He had driven only a short distance beyond the curve when the trio saw the truck turning around in a widened place in the road. It started forward, straight for the boys. That guy's not going to stop, Ned exclaimed and began to back up. He negotiated the curve successfully, but had to go so slowly that the truck overtook them. It hugged the inside of the road and squeezed the boys' car toward the deep ditch. Ned's car skidded and swerved to the edge. He applied the brake, but it was hopeless. The next moment, the car dropped backwards and crashed into the ditch. Uh-oh, hopefully they'll be okay. I'm sure they will.